I had a whole like encounter with the Lord where he walked me through 2 sets of doors 3 different times. Oh, I wish I had pulled up the thing I wrote about it, but because I can't remember what they all were, but it was like, you know, do you want empathy or do you want like power? And I was like, well, empathy is powerful. I had all these like wrestling moments, right? Yeah. And then so it was like a choose your own adventure moment with the Lord where I was like, that's awesome. And you get to that moment and you surprise yourself, right? Because if you asked me that, I would, you know, just sitting at coffee, I'd be like, oh, I'd choose empathy. But when I really got there, I was like, I do want to be powerful. And then you realize things about yourself, right? Like, oh, that still needs like healing. That still needs like what's behind that desire for power. Where do I feel powerless and helpless? And
Right.
Anyway,
I had a conversation with a friend, and he was like super about like singing. You know, like he wanted to be in front of people, like on the worship team and stuff like that. And we just had a conversation, and I started to dig a little bit deeper. I'm like, what do you love about singing?
Right.
You know, and you know, he was like saying some like generic statements. He's like leading the people worship and that kind of stuff. And you know, I was like, what about your voice? Like you speaking, what does that like mean to you? Like, do you feel like you have power in your voice, you know?
Yeah.
And anyway, long story short, we got to like this dissection of why he loved to lead worship. Because it was the place that he had power.
Right.
Right. Where his words could actually move and minister and change things and affect things, because in his everyday life, he felt like his words were kind of looked over or not heard, or he didn't know how to use like worship. Leading on a stage, like leading guitar and singing or whatever, was a place where he felt powerful. Right. Yeah. And so it was like this idea that he wanted, you know, I mean, to lead people in worship. And then it was like, I really want power.
Yeah.
Or I feel powerless in this area. And that wasn't the sum of who he is or something like that. But it was a recognition of, man, I'm using this gift, and in a way, like this is an amplification of my voice. You can't not hear me if I'm on the mic. Right.
Yeah.
And so it makes me feel like I have some sort of control over people listening and hearing me. Yeah. And it was like this really powerful moment that we had together. And it was like, he was like, oh, I didn't realize. Yeah.
That's incredible, because that's a huge part of like, as you walk out of formation and emotional health and healing and spiritual, all the things, right? You become somebody who can ask powerful questions.
Right.
And you can let people then walk a journey through that question. And the benefit then for them or yourself, like I have to ask myself powerful questions all the time. Some days I'm like, I just don't have the energy for it, but I try. And that helps you then put practical, real, tangible things behind some of the language we use that gets really muddy. Like, for example, I'm listening to you talk about this young man, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so that's really good for him, because then he can learn to, he's aware of that power, that desire, right? Which isn't necessarily bad, but he needs to have the capacity to surrender it, right? To Jesus, and operate out of a place of humility. And then the power comes out of that. But when you just tell people like, surrender, right? Surrender is the answer. Then everybody's like, okay, I surrender. But then when you're like, when you walk them through a process with great questions of like, okay, what am I actually surrendering? Okay, I'm saying, I really want to be powerful. I really want my voice to be heard, but I'm going to actively lay down that like driving desire for the sake of God's presence and his goodness and his plan.